I was standing in a man's home office at 79 years old, holding a stack of his tax documents in one hand and a pile of unopened medical bills in the other. The room felt small, not because of the furniture, but because of the air. It was heavy with the scent of old mahogany, dust, and a very specific kind of male helplessness that I had spent 7 decades trying to cure. The man was Everett. We had been dating for 5 months. We had shared nice seafood dinners in downtown Asheville. We had walked through the botanical gardens. He was soft-spoken. He had kind eyes, and he carried a quiet sadness that I mistook for depth. He leaned back in his oversized leather chair, the springs creaking under his weight. He looked at me, not with malice, not with greed, but with a terrifyingly comfortable smile. It was the smile of a man who had never had to wonder where the spare light bulbs were kept or how a deductible worked. "You've always been so good with the details, Dorothy," he said. His voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon. "I've been staring at those forms for weeks. I figured you'd know exactly what to do. You have that knack for it." And in that moment, something in my chest didn't just break. It evaporated. It was the knack. That word. It's the word people use for women when they don't want to admit we are doing labor. A knack is a gift. Labor is a job. Standing there at 79, I realized I wasn't a girlfriend. I wasn't a companion. I was an applicant for a position I had already resigned from 7 years ago. I was being hired as the CEO of Everett's life, and the salary was companionship. I looked at those papers. I felt the dry texture of the envelopes. I realized that if I sat down in the chair opposite him and opened that first bill, I would be signing a contract for the rest of my life. I would become the person who remembered his cardiologist's name, the person who knew which pharmacy had the lowest prices, the person who made sure the taxes were filed so the IRS didn't come knocking at 80. I was 70 years late to the realization, but it arrived with the force of a tidal wave. I have spent my entire adult life managing men who refuse to manage themselves. I married Arthur in the summer of 1966. I was 23, and I thought love was a series of tasks. My mother had taught me that a woman's love was measured by the sharpness of her husband's collars and the fullness of his stomach. Arthur was a dreamer. He was a man who lived in the clouds, full of jokes and stories about one day. He was charming. He was the kind of man who would bring me a single wildflower he found on the side of the road, and I would spend 3 hours cleaning the grease off his work overalls in return. At the time, that felt like a fair trade. I remember our first apartment. I remember the kitchen table where I sat every Friday night with a calculator and a checkbook. Arthur would be on the sofa, feet up, listening to the radio. "Don't worry your pretty head about the numbers, Artie," I'd say. "I've got it handled." I thought I was being a good wife. I didn't realize I was training him to be incompetent. Year after year, the ledger grew. I wasn't just paying bills. I was carrying the mental load, the invisible inventory of a family's existence. I knew when the car tires were balding. I knew when the children needed their booster shots. I knew that the upstairs bathroom leak would eventually rot the floorboards if I didn't call the plumber, because Arthur would just put a bucket under it and forget the bucket existed until it overflowed. I remember a Tuesday in 1984. I was 41. I was working a full-time job at the bank, raising 2 teenagers, and managing every square inch of our home. I was standing in the grocery store aisle at 7 p.m., trying to remember if we had enough milk, while also mentally calculating if we could afford the kids' summer camp. Arthur walked in that night, kissed me, and asked, "What's for dinner, Dot? I'm starving." I looked at him. He looked rested. He looked light. And I realized I was heavy. I had been heavy for 20 years. He called me the general. He told our friends, I'd be lost in a paper bag without Dorothy. Everyone laughed. They thought it was a compliment. They didn't see the dark circles under my eyes. They didn't see that while he was lost, I was the one holding the map, the compass, and the luggage. Then came the late 90s. Arthur's body began to fail him. The Parkinson's started as a tremor in his left hand, a small fluttering thing like a trapped bird. Suddenly, my management role shifted from administrative to medical. My kitchen table, once a place for family dinners, became a command center. Folders for Medicare, folders for the neurologist, a whiteboard with a grid for his medications, Cinemet at 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m. I became his hands. I became his memory. People would see us at church and whisper, "Dorothy is a saint. Look at how she cares for him." But saint is another word for a woman who has sacrificed her identity on the altar of someone else's needs. I spent the last decade of Arthur's life disappearing. I stopped reading books because my eyes were too tired from reading insurance fine print. I stopped seeing my friends because Arthur got anxious if I was gone for more than an hour. When Arthur died in 2018, I cried for him. I grieved the man I loved. But I also felt something else, something so shameful I didn't tell my own daughter for years. I felt relief. The day after the funeral, I sat in my living room. For the first time in 52 years, no one needed a pill. No one needed a doctor's appointment. No one needed me to find their glasses. The house was silent. And that silence was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I spent 2 years alone. I learned who Dorothy was. I learned that I like my coffee black, not with the 2 sugars Arthur preferred. I learned that I love to sit on the porch and watch the mountains turn blue as the sun sets. Then I met Gerald. He was 74, a widower like me. He was modern, or so he said. He took me out to nice bistros. He complimented my mind. But then, the small asks began. They are like termites. You don't notice them until the house starts to lean. "Dorothy, you're so organized. Could you look at this insurance letter? I can't make heads or tails of it." I found myself at his house one Sunday. He was watching a football game. I was in his kitchen, cleaning out his refrigerator because the smell of spoiled milk was bothering me. I stopped. I had a carton of expired eggs in my hand. I looked at the television in the other room. I looked at Gerald, laughing at a commercial. I realized, I am doing it again. I ended it with Gerald that night. He was confused. "But we were having so much fun," he said. "You were having fun, Gerald," I told him. I was working a second shift, which brings us back to Everett's office. That folder in my hand, the tax documents, the medical bills. Everett smiled at me, waiting for me to say, "Don't worry, dear, I'll take this home and sort it out." He was so sure of my knack. He was so sure that because I am a woman, I would naturally want to tidy up the chaos of his life. But I looked at him, really looked at him. He was a healthy man. He was capable. He had a computer. He had a phone. He just didn't want to do the boring, heavy lifting of being an adult. He wanted a Dorothy to do it for him. And for the first time in my 79 years, I chose myself. I didn't offer an excuse. I didn't apologize. I simply leaned forward and placed the folder back on his desk. I smoothed the edges of the paper until they were perfectly aligned. "They're yours, Everett," I said. My voice was as calm as the mountain air. "What?" he asked, his smile faltering. "But I told you I'm terrible at this stuff." "Then you should hire an accountant," I replied. "Because I am retired, not just from my job, but from this role. I've spent 70 years being the manager of men's lives. I'm not applying for the position again." I walked out of that house. I didn't look back at the mahogany desk or the helpless man sitting behind it. I am 79 years old now. My name is Dorothy. I live in a small house with a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. There are no folders on my kitchen table. There are no medication charts on my refrigerator. There is only a book I am currently reading, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and a cold glass of tea. Loneliness? People ask me if I'm lonely all the time. I tell them, loneliness is being in a room with a man who expects you to do his laundry while he ignores your soul. What I have now isn't loneliness. It's sovereignty. I spent my youth being a manager. I spent my middle age being a caretaker. Now, in the twilight of my life, I am finally a human being. I do absolutely nothing some days, and I've discovered that nothing is an extraordinary luxury. It is the freedom to own your own time. So if you are a woman of a certain age and a man hands you a folder, if he hands you his mess and calls it a knack, put it down. You've carried enough. The mountains are waiting. The silence is calling. And your life, your real, unburdened life, is finally ready to begin.